We'll see what happens. It's a very interesting time over there. But my message really for them is, you know, they have a very strong point of view. I don't think anybody's ever seen marches of 2 million people. I think we're going on Hong Kong. I think we're going to be learning a lot over the next 2 or 3 days.
Well, tensions remain high in Hong Kong as protesters say recent arrests and warnings from police are not going to shut them down. Joining us now to discuss the latest developments in the region, Director of the Center for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute, Michael Pillsbury. Always good to have you back with us.
Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, so I know you have been discussing with the president what's going on with China, the tariffs, the escalation. What can you tell us publicly about those conversations?
Well, I'm just an outside advisor. Well, I'm even what you might call a friend and an admirer of the president, and especially his strategy toward China. The kinds of things he's doing now should have been done 30 years ago. You'll notice in Hong Kong, he's not directly intervening. He's saying we'll learn a lot more in the next 2 or 3 days. Well, that's a reference to the cancellation of the demonstration, the arrest of Joshua Wong, and what looks like the potential for a crackdown. So if that happens, of course, it greatly complicates the trade talks the president's already said. So these two things, these two situations are linked, Hong Kong and whether or not the Chinese delegation comes here in a couple of weeks to have the 13th, what I call the 13th round of the trade talks.
Continues. So Joshua Wong, we had on a few days ago, a couple weeks ago here, shortly before he was arrested. Then we got word that he'd been arrested. He's out again. Some of the protesters say, the reporting in Vice News is that activists say this is all an attempt to intimidate protesters ahead of another weekend of demonstrations. They also say it's not going to work. So we're hearing from a lot of these folks, you know, tomorrow's protest has been declared illegal, and the police are telling them, we're going to arrest you if you show up. But there are massive numbers there in Hong Kong who have been willing to take to the streets nearly every weekend. What's your prediction for how this all ends, ultimately?
I don't know. I think the president is right. We're going to learn a lot in the next 2 or 3 days. There's been an interesting Reuters report from source to several Chinese officials that China and President Xi himself is really behind what Carrie Lam is doing in Hong Kong. She has apparently zero flexibility to meet the students' 5 demands. Now, one of those demands is probably the most important. That's for direct election of the leader of Hong Kong. You might think that's outrageous, or how dare they do that in a communist country, but China actually agreed back in 1990 that the ultimate aim is to have free election of the leader of Hong Kong. So China's already agreed to that. And the connection with the trade talks is we don't want them to be able, in the trade talks, to make a promise and then not keep it. So it's got to be legally binding. And I think that's what's holding the Chinese back. That's why they reneged in May. The president then basically punished them for that. If the talks get restarted now, that's a lot of really important progress. And I hope America's farmers are backing him, because the Chinese have already said it's the farmers we're going to try to manipulate.
Yeah, and we've heard from some of them on the show as well, saying we're nervous in the short term. We have to make plans. We have to plant crops. We have to invest in things and equipment and all kinds of things. They're nervous, but many of them are saying we're trying to stick in there with him because in the long run, we know it will pay off. Potentially, that's what they're hoping.
Yes.
And that for decades, they feel like no one has been sticking up for them, but they realize it may cause pain in the short term for them.
Well, there's this interesting poll the White House seems to have that's going to come out today or tomorrow, that 67% of farmers, American farmers, when they're asked, would you vote for President Trump today? They say yes. So the farmers appear to be patriotic, and they're not kind of working for China. They're looking for a long-term solution, which is what the president wants as well.
So quickly, let me ask you, as we watch, I mean, the sun's up, it's daytime there in Hong Kong as things play out this weekend. If China does in any way move in for any kind of more serious crackdown, we know that lots of troops have been fed into the area and along the border as well. What should the U.S. do or not do? This isn't our fight, but the people of Hong Kong are calling out to us looking for support.
Yes, well, there's 2 things. The first is we don't want to be the so-called black hand who instigates violence that then triggers a Chinese intervention. On the other hand, there'll be an automatic international reaction, I think, as happened 30 years ago, that the parliaments and the members of Congress in 50 countries will slap really severe sanctions on China to punish them for Hong Kong.
All right, we'll watch this weekend, as we know you will too. Michael Pillsbury, always good to have you.
Thanks, Shannon.